sacrifices, says your God. I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required of you this trampling of my courts? Bring no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and the calling of convocations, I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause. Come now, let us reason together, says God. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be eaten by the sword. For the mouth of your God has spoken. Ancient words from our tradition for our present day understanding.
I remember when I was young, sitting where you're sitting and looking up at somebody who was bluffing it, trying to pretend like what, in this case it was a he, was saying was something that he knew for a fact, and yet you could see, and particularly if you talked to him, that this is what he was taught as a child. He desperately wanted to believe it, but he got angry if you pushed too much. And here I'm a little kid asking questions in Sunday school class, and it's freaking the adults out, which freaked me out, right? Because I didn't know much about religion in the world, but I could tell they were bluffing. And that meant the people driving the bus of my life didn't have a map. And when I would hear this text that was just read, I kind of felt a validation for my anger. Because this is a text of seething anger of God at religion. Of comfort-based religion. Of pious religion, of nationalistic religion. Comfort zone religion, which allows a people to abuse others and sees no discrepancy there of saying they love God and exploit other people. What could be more topical for our time and place in history than this text where God in the symbol, this is a poet saying this, right? I mean, we understand that the Bible is poetry. It's things that human beings put together to talk about their mystical experiences, their experiences of revelation, but it's not history. It's not science. It's not that kind of fact. We are in a crisis in the world, in part because religion is so immature. Religion doesn't work scientifically. And so what happens is the people who think of themselves as most serious about religion have renounced science. And when you renounce the science of climate change, that is a huge problem for the species. And then you have another whole group of humankind that, because of the immaturity of religion, have left that conversation. Now, as you know, if you leave the conversation of politics and you stop voting, you stop getting involved, that doesn't mean that politics is going to leave you alone. right? Because somebody's going to sit in your chair and make decisions for you if you leave the political process. In the same way, when we leave the conversation of what life is all about, when we leave that to fundamentalists, when we let religion be defined as this superstition and not the fundamental questions that a human being asks, every human being asks, about what it means to be human in the cosmos. When we surrender that conversation, we leave someone else at the steering wheel. So as you listen today, I'm hoping you'll listen not just for yourself, but for the world. And not rely on my adequacy to do this work. You'll be able to take it in places I can't. You don't want my answers to your questions, right? But I want to talk about how we harmonize our hearts and our minds. How we harmonize our scientific minds with our mystic hearts. And I think it's incredibly important art, and it's not being done very well. We had this letter was left for the young mothers, and I thought some of you may not have seen it, but you need to hear this warning. To all mothers, truth will make you free. Here's the real truth. Your pastor does not really know God, yet he or she must be reborn again. God will call her at his timing. So it sounds like he's talking about Eileen. Repent. Or maybe it's a generic number letter, but you hear the fear. And if you're a progressive pastor, you get these every month or so. People, they don't hate you, but they're terrified. Because what they've been taught is this magical religion. And if somebody doesn't believe at that level of magic, everything bad's going to happen. Does that sound familiar? There was a story that I found particularly heartbreaking. Is a young mother. She had 3 children. And when the hurricane hit North Carolina, she wasn't going to leave because she has family there and her children there. And there's strength in numbers, she said. Now, I hope that worked out for her, right? You know, I'm hoping that worked out well for her. But can you hear the magical thinking that we all take part in? If we're pushed too far, if change takes place too fast, if we're too afraid or frustrated, we just want something simple and we want a magical being to make it all okay. It may be the God of the Bible. It may be the invisible hand of the market. It may be making America great again. See, it doesn't really matter who the genie is. It doesn't work. It just makes us feel comfortable. We're going to look at prayer, but we're going to try to look at prayer not as something magical and escapist, but as something powerful and orienting. That's going to be interesting, right? Now, I personally wondered when I heard this story of this young woman and her children, if that might not explain more of climate change denial than I had given people credit for. If people's lives have changed so much, maybe they're just trying to hunker down in the past and not have to change things. This, you know, it's just such a, you look at the situation in North Carolina and you have this religious Republican leadership that 6 years ago stopped a scientific study saying there's going to be flooding. Because they didn't want to believe it. Now that's a religious theological framework, right? We don't want this to be true, so we don't want to hear the science. You may not think of that as religion, but can you see how that is a part of that conversation? And you've heard about that because of the business-friendly policies of that state, that they've allowed the hog industry to dump waste into the lagoons that are now going to flood and possibly go into the water supply. So you realize a lot of the policy of this nation are based on magic. Magic. The flag's going to save us, right? Wearing red hats is going to save us. Guns are going to save us. Those are all things that are complete superstition. But we get afraid, right? That's very human. So to hate the people that are reacting like that is not going to help the world very much. To shut our ears to the cries of fear are not going to hurt very much. But I think that means that some people who are in the bus that's called religion need to really make a sacrificial struggle to reform ourselves so that we make the connection between science and the poetry of the heart. To do the hard work of reframing the poetry of the New Testament, the Christian Testament, so that it works in our world. It's the best gift we could give our children. How many here had to unlearn almost everything you learned in Sunday school when you went to science class? I mean, I wasn't asking for a show of hands, but probably most of us, right? What a crime. What a crime to stay within our comfort zone. One of the very uncomfortable questions we have to ask is, can we be reasonable scientific people if we believe there's an invisible person who grants our wishes? Right? Why learn the periodic chart if Jesus can really turn water into wine? Right? If Jesus can really walk on water, then why learn, physics? We have to realize the difference between our objective truth and our subjective truth. And to realize that religion is often talking about the truths of the heart, which are just as important as the scientific. I will plead guilty to everything religion has done, inquisitions, crusades, all of that. But religion didn't invent the atom bomb. Right? That's objectivity gone amok. Religion didn't invent fracking. We weren't smart enough to. Right? But that's a problem, isn't it? When the bus takes off and it threatens the species, that's bad too. So subjectivity that doesn't link to objectivity, we know that's a problem. But objectivity that doesn't link to the human heart is a problem as well. And religion, I believe, is the connection between those two. Now, one of the things that makes people think I'm making all of this up is that when I was in seminary, in addition to reading what I was supposed to read, I was going back in the back and I was reading the mystery religions and the other religions of the time. But I was also learning that the early church was very, very different than Orthodox Christianity. Very different. One of the things that happened was the early symbols were in Greek, and the poetry was in Greek. When it moved into Europe, people didn't know Greek. Augustine, who is one of the foundational people that put together early Christian theology, did not know Greek very well. And so the poetry was lost on him. A lot of what I'm doing is taking the Latin statements of faith, converting them back to the Greek, and playing with it as poetry. Which is, you can't do that if you're a literalist. So how do we do both of those? A word that was very important in the ancient church is logos. The word is translated word, but you lose it there because when you hear word, you think it's talking about the Bible or the words in the Bible. It's talking about the patterns of the cosmos, the patterns in your head. That the intelligence of your head is calibrated to the intelligence that's in the universe. I mean, the universe doesn't think, but it has patterns. It has mathematical properties to it. And the logos is that pattern behind things. I want you to listen to a couple. This is not a very good sermon. because a sermon is supposed to have this much information in it, so that you can listen to it. So this may be something you want to read after we do this, but I think it's very, very important that you hear this. These are two quotes from the early church. And when I saw this, it just blew me away. This is Clement of Alexandria, who was the first bishop of Alexandria, Egypt, in the first 200 years of the church. He died in 210, I think. Everything that is contrary to right reason is sin. That's the logos. Everything contrary to the logos, but to reason or to science, depending on how you want to look at it, is sin. Accordingly, therefore, the philosophers think fit to define the most generic passions thus: lust as desire disobedient to reason, fear as weakness disobedient to reason, pleasure as an elation of the spirit disobedient to reason. Does that sound like the religion you were taught? If then disobedience in reference to reason is the generating cause of sin, how shall we escape the conclusion that obedience to reason, the word in capitals, which we call faith, will of necessity be the effective cause of duty? And this is his climactic sentence. For virtue itself is a state of the soul rendered harmonious by reason in respect to the whole life. I'll read that again. That's really hard to, that's why I'm saying you may need to read this to follow what I'm saying. But he's saying virtue is a state of the soul. It's a harmony of the soul where reason has calibrated it, has harmonized it to life itself. So the word does not mean the Bible. It sure as hell does not mean the Westminster Confession of Faith. It's not that kind of word. It's the pattern behind things. And once we realize that, then Scripture is very important. Those are things calibrated to help the mind find that pattern more deeply, profoundly. Here's Justin Martyr, who was even earlier in the church's history. This blew me away too. He said, "We have been taught that Christ is the first begotten of God, and we have declared Christ to be the Logos, the Word, of which all humankind participates." Now listen to this. You won't be able to go to heaven after you hear this sentence. I'm sorry. "Those, therefore, who lived according to reason, the Logos, were really Christians even though they were thought to be atheists, such as among the Greeks, Socrates, Heraclitus, and others like them." That's kind of important, isn't it? And didn't your heart always know that? When you were a kid in Sunday school and you heard somebody blowing smoke, you knew it had to be deeper and more profound. It had to be about your life and the common life. You knew that. So what a liberating insight to realize that's what Jesus is talking about. That's what even Paul is talking about. Not telling you to believe something that you can't prove, but to harmonize your thought and your reason with life. Your biology, physics, all of that. It's hard to be loving when you're superstitious. Think about it. Reason is a part of love, but also love is a part of reason. Because if reason takes off by itself, it can justify and rationalize almost anything. So these early church leaders are telling us one side of the equation. That these are mystics who believe in reason. Now there are scientists who believe in mysticism. Listen to this from Einstein. This is the other side of the bridge. The first service didn't get this because I remembered it too late. But this is about as mystic as it can get, and this is Albert Einstein. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe. A part limited in time and space. I'm going to shift this from the masculines. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of our consciousness. This delusion, in other words, that we're separate, is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Right? I mean, you would think that was a Buddhist saying that. And if the church had not reframed the early church, you would recognize this as Christianity as well. And Einstein says, "We never cease to stand like curious children before the great mystery into which we were born. The most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mystical. It is the source of all art and science." Now, this is somebody who's not a theist. Because what we're talking about is the sense of interconnectedness. And what makes it mystical is when we can feel it as well as think it. So whether or not there's an invisible person, this connectedness is personal. Deeply and intimately personal. So putting a human face on it can be a way of feeling the truth of it. But when we had a prayer a few minutes ago for a mother across the ocean, it's that personal connectedness that's real. Whether or not they're angels taking it across the Atlantic. Maybe. Maybe there's a reluctant God that's waiting for us to beg the right way. Okay, I'll heal her, but just because you begged. Or maybe there's a connectedness that isn't just abstract, it's personal, it's intimate. And maybe that's what prayer is about. Maybe prayer is the messenger between our objective consciousness and our subjective consciousness. Maybe that's why it's expressed as an angel or Hermes or Christ or something that goes and makes the word flesh. Makes the subjective mystical into objective reality. Your awareness is not magical, but is very, very mystical. What a strange thing that a room full of matter is aware. How strange is that? To realize your consciousness is less like artificial intelligence than it is like the light inside a lightning bug. It comes up through your sentient flesh. The Word is made flesh. It's incarnated. They're truths of every person, not just Jesus, not just Buddha, but all of us. There's a light shining out of the darkest places of us. And it's not coming from our minds. It's coming from something deeper. Something cosmic. And religion should be dancing to that song. C.S. Lewis said, "The word is not something we can think. It's that by which we think." And that's part of that, we'll forget it. Like when you're laying on your back and you're looking at the stars, and at some point you go, okay, that's it, my brain just blew out. Right? It's the human condition that we can't think about certain things. Religion gives us a scaffolding. All of it's made up, but the experience is not made up. The experience is the most important part of our lives. That deep interconnectedness, that deep source that we're coming out of, whatever it is. Carl Sagan has, I'm just so grateful, the Cosmos, remember that series? There were hymns. There were hymns of an atheist scientist that every mystic could say yes to. Right? Because the theological part, that's a vessel, that's a vehicle. The mystical part, that's what we share. Listen to this. This is his demon-haunted world. On the one hand, he's trying to say that when you don't have science, there's no limit to what we fear. He calls science a candle in the dark. But he also says this: science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. When we recognize our place in an immensity of light years and in the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, the beauty, the subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combine, It is surely spiritual. So are our emotions in the presence of great art or music or literature, or acts of exemplary selfless courage such as Mohandas Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. The notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both. But we need a religion that's real. We can't bluff our way out of this. We have to have the honesty to trust science and reason and have a mysticism that's deep enough to find meaning on the other side of that honesty. Reason needs love. Love needs reason. And prayer is the vessel that can mediate between those two. Altered state, going deeply, meditating, contemplating, whatever you call it. It's that bridge. When I went to seminary, I came in and out of sort of sanity because it was driving me crazy. And I'd go to the park at lunchtime and read Thomas Merton and Taoism, and that's how I got through. I mean, it's wonderful people, wonderful teaching and stuff, but not mystical. Not the reason that I became religious. This is a passage from Thomas Merton, and I'm putting God in here, but he has the word he all through it. And what you lose with that is obviously the gender issues. What you lose the other way is that sense of personal connectedness. And that's when I use the word God, if you'll just retranslate it. Because the word God is more like a bookmarker. We all mean something different when we say it. What is your mystical experience? Is it theistic or not? That's not important. So let me read this wonderful passage by way of summary. Contemplation is also the response to a call. That's prayer for him, is contemplation. A call from the one who has no voice, and yet who speaks in everything that is. And who, most of all, speaks in the depths of our own being. For we ourselves are words of God, but we are words that are meant to respond to God, to answer to God, to echo God. And even in some ways to contain God and signify God. Again, that's the bookmark for whatever your experience is of the profound. Contemplation is this echo. It is a deep resonance in the inmost center of our spirit, in which our very life loses its separate voice and resounds with the majesty and mercy of the hidden and living one. God answers in us, and his answer is divine call, divine creativity, making all things new. We ourselves become God's echo and answer. It is as if in creating us, God asked a question, and in awakening us to contemplation, God answered the question, so that the contemplative is at once the question and the answer. So, I hope as you go out into this week, you'll realize how important keeping that depth and interconnectedness is. And when you hear the word, logos, I hope that you'll never again think of that as just words on a page, and that you'll realize it's the most interesting topic in the world. And what the poetry is telling you is that wisdom is calling your wisdom to come out and play. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.